In Venezuela, Operation The Barracks Go to the People moves forward as part of the comprehensive defense of its sovereignty. In Ecuadorian President Noboa has called a referendum on the return of foreign military bases and a popular consultation to form a constituent assembly. And in Palestine, the death toll from the Israeli aggression has risen to 65,174, with 166 others injured since the conflict started on October 7, 2023. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Venezuela began the deployment of Operation The Barracks Go to the People in the framework of the integral defense of its sovereignty. During this Saturday, the Bolivarian National Armed Forces mobilized to the communal circuits as part of the preparation activities for defense of the country. Uniformed people joined the call of the national government, who urged the population to mobilize in order to strengthen the civic-military union. The initiative arises from the deployment of U.S. military vessels in the Caribbean Sea under the pretext of fighting drug trafficking. And Venezuelan Minister of Defense Vladimir Lopez offered details of the Sovereign Caribbean 200 exercise held on the island of La Orchila in the insular territory Francisco de Miranda. The minister informed that the 72-hour land and naval air exercise is still on the way, and so far it has been carried out according to plan. The activities have been carried out in popular military and police fusion, which has allowed to increase the operational readiness of the National Bolivarian Armed Forces. Padrino reaffirmed that under the premise of drug trafficking, the U.S. administration has wanted to discredit and eliminate the democratic Venezuelan institutionality. In the face of this scenario of aggression to national sovereignty, the joint campaign maneuver Sovereign Caribbean 200 has demonstrated the effectiveness of the synergies in defense of the homeland. And Venezuela hosts the third International Telecommunications Fair Field event with over 140 national and international companies in attendance. The event is held at Caracas Polyhedron Arena, where hundreds of companies demonstrate the country's technological advances within the framework of future strategic alliances. Venezuela has experienced a 7.13% growth in its communication services and a significant progress in national connectivity. In Puerto Rico, the Independence Party and the social organization Mothers Against War denounced this Friday that the U.S. government is remilitarizing the territory for a possible intervention in Venezuela. Independent Senator Adrian Gonzalez asserts that Puerto Rico is a militarized territory of the United States, adding that a test is being conducted that could also take place in South America. Similarly, on September 14th, Mothers Against War held a protest against the U.S. deployment, which was supported by the Independence Party. These statements come in the context of the U.S. military deployment in the Caribbean, while an elite marine unit began amphibious maneuvers on Puerto Rican soil. And the Mexican government has warned that at least 198 Mexicans have been detained at Alligator Alcatraz Detention Center in the United States, which was ordered to close by a federal judge. Mexican Foreign Minister Juan Ramón de la Fuente reported that consulates are conducting interviews with Mexican migrants who are detained in the United States. He explained that Alligator Alcatraz is a short-term detention center, so there is a daily movement of inmates. He also noted that during the last day of interviews at the detention center, complaints of mistreatment have been received. And in the United States, the Pentagon announced on Friday that it will only grant journalists access to its facilities if they agree not to publish certain information. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell explained in an email to multiple newsrooms that reporters will be required to sign a pledge not to disclose information, even unclassified, that is not expressly authorized for release. On the threat of the revocation of press credentials, the rule is set to take effect within 2 to 3 weeks and will apply to all media outlets covering the Department of Defense headquarters. This unprecedented measure gives the Pentagon broad control over the content released.
The President and the Secretary of Defense make decisions. And so certainly also in the region, they say...
We have our first break coming up. Remember, you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We're going to be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping held a telephone conversation. Trump says the two will meet at an Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in South Korea in November. Our correspondent in China, Bruno Falsis, has the details.
Greetings to the workers in the studio in La Habana and the audience that join us from this broadcast. I am in Beijing now, where on the evening of September 19, the Chinese President Xi Jinping had a telephone conversation with the United States President Donald Trump. The conversation focused on the bilateral relationship and other topics of common interest, highlighting the need for a constructive approach to the future of both relations, the Chinese and USA relationship. Xi, the president of China, remembered the shared history of both countries during the Second World War and the importance of honoring collaboration in difficult times. He also emphasized the need for mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and beneficial cooperation. Trump, for his part, applauded China's military parade, marking the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War. He expressed his desire to build a long-term positive relationship with China and stressed the importance of working together for world peace. The phone call comes in the context of a trade tension between the United States and China. U.S. Secretary of State, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and the Chinese Deputy Prime Minister He Lifeng held a meeting in Madrid last Sunday. This meeting, which marked the fourth round of negotiations between the both nations, arose after the imposition of tariffs by the United States on Chinese products, which led to a tariff war between these nations, reaching more than 145% of tariffs between both of them. Today, reduced to 30% on Chinese products and 10% on the products of United States. During these discussions, both the importance of constructive dialogue and the need to find practical solutions to problems such as the regulations of TikTok in the United States were highlighted. This is a report by Bruno Falsi, teleSUR correspondent in China. We return now in the studio in La Habana.
And also in China, police in Hong Kong defused an exploded ordnance found at a construction site that is believed to date back to the World War II. The discovery was made in Quarry Bay, a popular residential and business district on the western side of Hong Kong Island. About 6,000 local residents were evacuated from the area while disposal teams set up sandbags and other specialized equipment for defusal. The team worked through the night and successfully defused the bomb. No injuries were reported. According to the police's bomb disposal team, which was dispatched when the explosive was found, it is functional and highly dangerous. They assess that it dates back to the World War II and was likely dropped by a U.S. aircraft. An Ecuadorian President Noboa called a referendum on a return of foreign military bases and a popular consultation to form a constituent assembly. The objective is to reform Article 5 of the Constitution and draft a new constitution with the participation of more than 13 million Ecuadorians. In response, the court issued a statement emphasizing that Ecuador is a constitutional and democratic state where all authorities and institutions must abide by the law and suggested a violation of the stipulated legal framework. The amendment to Article 5 of 2008 Constitution, which prohibits foreign military bases, is presented as a measure against drug trafficking, but analysts explain that it represents a surrender of sovereignty. And the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, CONAI, denounced the freezing of its leaders and organizations' bank accounts in the context of the national strike call for the repeal of Decree 126. This decree eliminated the diesel subsidy and raised its price by 56%, according to the official statement. The banks justified the measure as a response to state orders, which CONAI interprets as an act of intimidation and criminalization of social protest. The organization, in a statement issued after an extraordinary assembly, announced an immediate and indefinite national strike. The mobilization responds to the economic impact of the rise in diesel prices, making transportation, production, and food more expensive.
We call on our grassroots supporters, social organizations, and civil society throughout Ecuador to participate in an immediate and indefinite national strike. We demand the immediate repeal of Decree 126, which eliminates the 10% subsidy, as it is a measure that increases the cost of transportation, production, food, and the lives of millions of Ecuadorian families.
Argentina's President Javier Milei acknowledged during an interview on Friday that he is negotiating a new loan with the U.S. Treasury Department to mitigate the financial crisis affecting the country. The Central Bank of Argentina intervened in the official exchange market after disbursing $680 million on Friday and over $432 million in the previous 2 days to keep the dollar exchange rate within the range agreed upon with the International Monetary Fund. This agreement, worth $20 billion, requires the organization to prevent the currency from exceeding the upper limit. The crisis is worsening, with the country risk at 1,515 basis points, an increase of 4.3% since August 26, 2024, reflecting the difficulties in financing. Also in Argentina, the government was criminally charged for failure to fulfill its duties as a public servant after Congress rejected the veto on the disability emergency. It is now up to President Javier Milei to enforce the law and carry out its implementation. Representatives of We Do For Our Country, Esteban Paulon, and the representative of the Socialist Party, Monica Fein, filed a complaint against President Milei and other authorities for breach of public duty. Judge Sebastián Casanello accepted the complaint and stated that he will investigate the president for delaying implementation. Cornered, the enraged government accused the deputies of being irresponsible for undermining fiscal balance. Now our second break coming up. Before we invite you to visit our Facebook page at teleSUR English, you'll be able to watch our top stories, special live coverage, and much more. Follow our page and activate the notification button to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. A financial break, don't go away. Welcome back. The U.S. Senate rejected both parties' bills to avoid a government shutdown at the end of September, while the Trump administration proposes to sell almost $6 billion in weapons to Israel. Our correspondent Jorge Stoso with the details.
Thank you. There is concern here in Washington given the fact that could be in 10 days a government shutdown, and that is the result of disagreements in the Senate that they couldn't pass the proposal of the Republicans. Chuck Schumer, the leader of the minority of the Democratic Party, says that the proposal of the Republicans are not good enough. There was a transitional proposal that they did that was financing the government until the end of the year, and now that could represent that after October the 1st could be the shutdown of non-essential government officials and agencies, could affect the payment of the government's members, And also, there's a lot of financial areas that could be affected by the shutdown. So that shows clearly the polarization, even in the Congress, that is taking place this week. Also, there is sort of a new proposal that could have been said by President Trump, but is not confirmed. He could have suggested that the U.S. was ready to sell up to $6.4 billion in guns to Israel, especially Apache helicopters and assault cars. And that is very weird, if you want, because yesterday in the morning, President Trump had a telephone conversation of about 2 hours with the President Xi Jinping, where they addressed areas of conflict around the world, including the area of Israel. And both of them were mentioning that they were seeking to work together in order to achieve the peace. So for one side, we are talking about his, together with the other leader of the most populous country, China, and the second economy, pushing for peace. And on the other hand, he could have said, and again, it's not confirmed yet, that the US could be ready to sell $6.4 billion in guns to Israel, a country that has been accused more and more countries, including the United Nations, that are committing a genocide against the people of Palestine. We get back to you now.
The Palestinian death toll has risen to 65,174, with 166,071 others injured since Israeli aggressions against Gaza erupted on October 7, 2023, according to Gaza's health authorities. According to reports from the Ministry of Health in the enclave, in the last 24 hours, hospitals received 33 bodies, including 1 recovered from the rubble and 146 injured. Systematic starvation claimed many lives in the Strip, totaling 440 people, including 147 minors. The international community denounced the use of hunger as a weapon of war and warned of a humanitarian catastrophe with irreversible consequences for an entire generation. And in Syria, citizens took to the streets of Homs city to protest against the transitional government's plans to sign security agreements with Israel. Thousands of people demonstrated in the streets of Homs in support of the resistance of the Palestinian people in their struggle against the occupation forces of the Zionist regime. This new protest demonstrates citizen discontent with the transitional government for supporting Israel's expansionist plans, despite the constant attacks of the Tel Aviv army against Syrian territory, which increased after the overthrow of President Bashar al-Assad. And in Iran, condemned this reinstatement of United Nations sanctions and reiterated the peaceful nature of its nuclear program. Iran's foreign ministry opposes UN sanctions backed by the European Union. It claims the Cairo deal with the International Atomic Energy Agency, seen as a diplomatic breakthrough, is being ignored. The country emphasized that the measure comes at a time when its peaceful nuclear facilities are under Israeli attack. On September 9th, Iran had announced a new understanding with the International Atomic Energy Agency that defines mechanisms for resuming inspections and cooperation, guaranteeing its sovereign rights. The Supreme National Security Council warned that any hostile action would lead to the suspension of the agreement.
Requirements of resolution.
Additionally, Russia and China announced that they will not recognize Western countries' attempts to reimpose United Nations sanctions on Iran and promised to continue business as usual. Russia's United Nations Security Council representative Vasily Nebensia denounced the reimposition of sanctions against Iran as illegitimate and coercive. China's United Nations Security Council Ambassador Fu Kong called for sanctions against Iran to be suspended, saying the Arab nation's efforts must be recognized. He stressed that reimposing sanctions against Iran undermines efforts to find a solution and said the U.S. must pave the way for negotiations.
The politics of coercion and upheld the principles of diplomacy.
Also on Friday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced the Commission's proposals for a 19th package of sanctions against Russia, which primarily target the country's energy and financial sectors in the framework of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The European Union plans to ban the import of Russian liquefied natural gas into its market and impose sanctions on an additional 118 vessels from Russia's shadow fleet. The EU will also expand the ban on transactions involving banks in Russia and other countries. The EU intends to transform the Russian frozen assets into repair loans for Ukraine. Furthermore, Moscow has repeatedly said that taking over its fund violates the international law. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For telesur English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.